I want you to picture something for a moment. Imagine sitting in your own kitchen, in complete darkness. Not because the power is out, not because you forgot to flip the switch, but because you chose the dark. Because somehow, the dark felt safer than turning on the light and seeing what your life had actually become. That was me. My name is Alyssa Duke. And on a Tuesday night in the middle of November, I sat on the cold tile floor of my kitchen, back pressed against the cabinet below the sink, knees pulled up to my chest, and I stared at nothing. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just sat there, breathing, existing, trying to figure out how a woman who had just received $10,000 in her name could not afford to put food on the table for her own child. Then I heard the soft padding of little feet, the kind of footsteps that a mother knows before she even opens her eyes. The kind that are light and careful, like the child wearing them understands, even at 9 years old, that the world is a fragile place and she shouldn't press too hard on it. The footsteps stopped just inside the kitchen doorway. I didn't move. I didn't speak. And then a small, quiet voice broke through the dark like the thinnest beam of light under a door. "Mom, why is there no food?" She paused. And in that pause, I heard her trying to make sense of something that made no sense. "You get $10,000. It wasn't said with anger. It wasn't an accusation. It was just a question. The kind only a child can ask, because only a child is still innocent enough to believe that the answer should be simple. Only a child still trusts that things should add up. That math should work. That if your mother has money, there should be food. Her name was Leah. Leah Wallace. She had my eyes, dark brown, always a little too serious for a 9-year-old, and her father's last name, from a man who hadn't been in either of our lives for 6 years. She was the best thing I had ever done. The one decision in my life I had never once regretted. And that night, when she whispered those words in the dark, something cracked open inside my chest. Not broke, cracked. There is a difference. Breaking is final. Cracking is the moment just before you either fall apart completely or decide you are going to hold yourself together with everything you have left. I held myself together. I reached up and turned on the light under the cabinet, just the small one, soft and yellow. Not the big overhead light. I wasn't ready for that much reality yet. Leah blinked. She was wearing her yellow pajamas, the ones with the small white stars on them. Her hair was in 2 unraveling braids that she had done herself before bed because I had been too tired to do them for her. That detail alone nearly finished me. I opened my arms. She didn't ask any more questions. She just walked over and folded herself into my lap the way she used to when she was 4, even though her legs were too long for it now and her knees bumped awkwardly against the cabinet door. She laid her head on my shoulder, and I held her, and I pressed my face into the top of her head and breathed her in. "I'll figure it out," I whispered. "I promise." She nodded against my shoulder. She believed me. God help me, she believed me. And I knew, sitting there on that cold kitchen floor in the pale yellow light with my daughter in my arms and an empty refrigerator behind us, that I could not keep living this way. Something had to change. Everything had to change. But to understand how I got to that kitchen floor, you have to go back. You have to understand who Gordon Foley was before you can understand what he did. Because men like Gordon don't announce themselves. They don't walk into your life wearing a sign that says, "Warning, I will slowly dismantle everything you are." They walk in looking like salvation. I met Gordon 3 years before that night in the kitchen. I was 31 years old, freshly divorced. Well, not divorced exactly, more like freshly abandoned. And I was raising Leah alone on a receptionist's salary at a small physical therapy clinic on the east side of our city. We lived in a 2-bedroom apartment that was clean but tired. The carpet had a stain near the front door that I had scrubbed so many times the fibers were almost gone. The kitchen faucet dripped. The heating unit made a sound in winter like it was personally offended by the cold. But it was ours. Leah and mine. And we were okay. We weren't eating steak. We weren't taking vacations. But Leah had what she needed. School supplies, a winter coat that fit, lunch money, dance class on Saturday mornings that I stretched my budget thin to keep paying for because the look on her face when she danced was worth every penny I didn't have. I was tired. I won't pretend I wasn't. Single motherhood is a kind of exhaustion that doesn't fully translate to people who haven't lived it. It's not just the physical tiredness of working all day and coming home to cook and clean and help with homework and do bath time and bedtime and then lie awake wondering if you're doing enough. It's the mental weight of being the only one. The only decision maker. The only safety net. The only one who notices when the school shoes are too tight or the report card slipped or the nightmares are coming back. There is no one to hand it off to. There is no shift change. You are always on. So when Gordon Foley walked into my life, I want to be honest with you, I was not naive. I was not some young girl blinded by flowers and flattery. I was a tired, practical, clear-eyed woman who should have known better. But even clear-eyed women can miss things when they are that tired. He came in as a patient at the clinic. A knee injury from a weekend basketball game. Nothing serious, a mild sprain that needed a few weeks of guided therapy. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a calm way of speaking that I noticed immediately. Not flashy. Not loud. He didn't try to charm the whole room. He was just steady. Solid. The kind of man who seems to take up exactly the right amount of space. Not too much, not too little. He asked me my name on his second visit. I told him. He smiled. Said it was a good name. I laughed and told him most people just called me Ally. He said he'd call me Alyssa. That Ally sounded like a nickname for someone who hadn't figured out who she was yet. He said I seemed like someone who had. I don't know why that stayed with me. But it did. He asked me to dinner on his fourth visit. I said no. He nodded, said he respected that, and didn't push. He asked again 2 weeks later when his therapy was finishing up and he was technically no longer a patient. I said I'd think about it. He gave me his number and said there was no rush. I thought about it for a week. I talked to my friend Sandra about it, who told me I deserved a night out. I talked to myself about it in the mirror at 11 o'clock at night after Leah was asleep, going back and forth like I was cross-examining a witness. I made a list, which sounds ridiculous, but I did. I made a literal list of reasons to go and reasons not to. The reasons to go kept winning. He was kind. He was patient. He hadn't pushed. He seemed to have his life together. He had a good job. He worked in logistics management for a distribution company, wore pressed shirts, drove a clean car. He didn't talk about himself constantly. He listened when I spoke. So I called him, and we went to dinner. And it was good. It was genuinely, warmly, comfortably good. We talked for 2 hours without a lull. He asked about Leah with real curiosity, not the performative interest some men put on when they are trying to impress a single mother. He asked what she liked, what made her laugh, what she was afraid of. He listened to my answers. By the end of that dinner, I was not in love with him. I was not even close to that. But I was open. I was open in a way I hadn't been in a long time. And that openness felt like sunlight through a window after a long gray season. Looking back now, I wish I had closed that window. Not because I regret Leah having someone in her life who, for a while, felt like a father figure. Not because I think I was stupid or careless or deserved what came next. I don't believe any of that. I wish I had closed that window because the warmth I felt wasn't coming from the sun. It was coming from a fire. And I hadn't yet learned the difference. Gordon and I dated for 8 months before he brought up moving in together. By then, Leah had met him, slowly, carefully, on my terms. I had been intentional about that. I wasn't going to bring a parade of men through my daughter's life. If someone was going to be introduced to Leah, they had to matter. They had to be worth the adjustment. Gordon passed every test I gave him. He was patient with her shyness. He remembered small things, her favorite cartoon character, the name of her best friend at school, the fact that she didn't like cheese on her spaghetti, but would eat it melted in everything else. He brought her a book about butterflies once, completely unprompted, because I had mentioned offhandedly that she had become obsessed with them after a science project. Leah warmed to him slowly. But she warmed. And when he suggested we move in together, he framed it thoughtfully. He said he wasn't trying to rush anything. He said Leah's comfort was the priority. He said he wanted to be a steady presence in our lives. He had a house, an actual house, not an apartment, with a backyard and a bedroom that could be Leah's, painted whatever color she wanted. She chose purple. He painted it himself, one Saturday while she watched from the doorway, handing him the roller when he asked for it, slowly starting to smile. I cried in the hallway where neither of them could see me. I genuinely thought, that this was the chapter things got better. We moved in 8 months after that conversation. Leah started at a new school, which was hard for a few weeks, but she adjusted. She loved the backyard. She loved the purple room. She loved having space and stability, and a kitchen table big enough for 3 people. Gordon and I got married 14 months after we moved in. Small ceremony, 20 people, a restaurant we liked, Leah in a pale blue dress she picked herself. My mother cried. Gordon's brother made a toast that was genuinely funny. I laughed so hard my mascara ran. It felt real. It felt like a beginning. And for 6 months after the wedding, it was fine. Just fine. Not fireworks. Not the stuff of movies. But solid. Functional. Warm enough to live in. Then things started to shift. So slowly I almost didn't notice. The first shift was so small that I actually laughed when it happened. We were arguing about grocery shopping. I had bought the wrong brand of something. I don't even remember what. Coffee, maybe, or pasta sauce. Something inconsequential. And Gordon said, very calmly, very reasonably, that it would probably be easier if he just handled the grocery shopping going forward. He said I was busy, he had more flexibility in his schedule, and it would take one thing off my plate. It sounded like help. It felt like care. I said okay. The second shift came a month later. We had a joint account that we'd opened when we moved in together, where we both deposited money for household expenses. I noticed one week that my card was declined at the gas station. I called the bank, confused. I had definitely deposited my portion. The representative told me there had been a large withdrawal 2 days prior. When I asked Gordon about it that evening, he was immediately apologetic. He explained he'd had an unexpected expense, a work-related payment he needed to make urgently and hadn't had time to discuss with me. He said he'd replace the money by the end of the week. He looked genuinely sorry. He brought me tea while we talked. He touched my hand. He replaced the money. Exactly as he said. I let it go. The third shift was when he suggested that, for simplicity, we merge everything. Not just the household account, everything. One shared account, both our paychecks deposited into it, all expenses managed from there. He made a spreadsheet. He sat me down and walked me through it. He showed me how much we'd save in fees, how much cleaner the budgeting would be, how easy it would be to track our goals. It was a very convincing spreadsheet. I said yes. And from that day forward, Gordon fully managed every dollar that entered our household. I know what you're thinking. I know. And yes, looking back, these are the steps that anyone on the outside can see clearly. The slow, deliberate construction of control, one small, reasonable-sounding suggestion at a time. Each one offered as help. Each one accepted because it made sense in isolation. Each one tightening the walls of a room I didn't yet realize I was standing in. But here is the thing about financial abuse that most people don't understand. It doesn't look like abuse. It looks like partnership. It looks like one person being responsible, so the other doesn't have to be. It looks like efficiency and organization and care. It feels at first like relief. The trap doesn't feel like a trap. It feels like shelter, until the door locks from the outside. And by then, you've forgotten where you put your key. By the end of our first full year with the merged finances, I had no independent access to our money. I was given what Gordon called an allowance, a word I had grown to hate more than almost any other word in the English language. A weekly amount that he determined, transferred to a small account in my name that I could use for personal expenses. Gas. Lunches. Small things for Leah. If I needed more than the allowance, I asked. Sometimes he said yes. Sometimes he said no. He always had a reason. We were saving for something. An expense was coming up. We needed to be careful this month. The reasons were different, but the effect was always the same. I was dependent on his approval to spend money in my own life. But here is the thing, I was still working. I was still earning a salary. I was still contributing financially to this household. My paycheck went directly into that joint account every 2 weeks. And from that account, Gordon decided what happened to it. He paid the mortgage. He paid the utilities. He bought groceries, which always seemed adequate, never quite generous. He maintained the cars. On paper, the household functioned. But I had no idea what our actual financial picture looked like. I didn't know our account balances. I didn't know what we had saved, what we owed, what was being spent, and where. When I asked, Gordon would give me what I can only describe as a summary, a brief, reassuring overview that told me just enough to stop the question but not enough to actually see. "We're fine," he would say. "I'm handling it. Don't stress yourself." And because I was tired, and because I trusted him, and because the alternative, forcing a confrontation, demanding full access, implying that I didn't believe him, felt like more conflict than I had the energy for, I let it be. I let it be for almost 2 years. And then I fell. Not metaphorically. Literally. I fell at work. It was a rainy Wednesday morning in September. The clinic's back hallway had a stretch of floor that had been mopped right before I walked through it, and there was no wet floor sign. My left foot slid. I went down hard, my hip, my lower back, my left wrist all taking the impact at once. I remember the sound of it more than the pain. A kind of heavy, ugly thud that seemed too loud for a human body. I was on the floor of that hallway for probably 40 seconds before anyone came. Which doesn't sound long. But when you're lying on a cold linoleum floor trying to take inventory of your own body, 40 seconds is a long time. My wrist was fractured. My lower back sustained what the doctor called a significant soft tissue injury that would require physical therapy, which I had some familiarity with, given where I worked, and a period of limited activity. I was off work for 11 weeks. During those 11 weeks, Gordon was attentive in a way that almost felt like the early days. He drove me to appointments. He brought me things I needed. He told me not to worry. He handled everything. Everything. Including the workers' compensation claim. Including the communications with the clinic's insurance carrier. Including, eventually, the settlement offer that came 4 months after my injury, when the clinic's insurance company, rather than face a lawsuit over the unmarked wet floor, offered me a lump sum payment in exchange for a signed release. $10,000. My lawyer, a young woman named Patricia, who had handled my claim efficiently and kindly, called me on a Friday afternoon to tell me the offer had come through. She said it was fair given the nature of the injury and the liability of the clinic. She said it would take about 3 weeks to process once I signed, and the check would come directly to me. I signed. I called Gordon immediately. I told him the news. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "That's great, Alyssa. That's really great. I'll take care of getting that deposited." I didn't think anything of it. 3 weeks later, $10,000 landed in our joint account. And disappeared. I want to be clear, it didn't disappear all at once. It wasn't a single withdrawal that I could have pointed to and said, "There. That's when he took it." It vanished the way everything in a financially abusive household vanishes. Gradually, across many small transactions, each one with an explanation, each one filed away in my mind under Gordon's handling it, until the total was just gone. He said some of it went toward a credit card balance he had been managing that I didn't know we had. He said some of it went into savings, though the savings balance, on the one occasion I saw it, did not reflect any such increase. He said some went toward a car repair for his vehicle. He said some went toward a quarterly insurance payment. By the time I started asking specific questions, really asking, pushing past the summaries, demanding to see numbers, the account showed a balance of $412. $412, where $10,000 had been. And in our refrigerator, half a carton of eggs, a container of leftover rice, a block of cheese that was close to its edge, and a nearly empty bottle of ketchup. The pantry had a can of beans, half a box of pasta, and a bag of flour that I had no energy to use. I had asked Gordon the previous weekend about groceries. He said he'd handle it. He didn't handle it. He had been working late 3 nights that week. At least, that's what he said. I had $11 in my personal account. Not enough to do a real grocery run. Enough for milk and bread, and maybe one more thing. And on Tuesday night, I put Leah to bed with a dinner of scrambled eggs and toast, which I smiled through, calling it a breakfast for dinner night, making it sound like an adventure, watching her eat it without complaint because she was a child who had learned not to complain. And then I sat down on the kitchen floor in the dark. And I stopped pretending. Just for that one night. I stopped holding the smile up. I stopped finding the angle that made it okay. I stopped telling myself it was going to get better on its own. I just sat there in the truth of it. And then my daughter's footsteps came down the hall. And she whispered the question that changed everything. "Mom, why is there no food? You get $10,000. I held Leah until she fell back asleep on my shoulder, right there on the kitchen floor. Then I carried her to her bed. She was too big for it, really, but I managed. And I tucked her in, and I kissed her forehead, and I stood in the doorway of her purple room for a long moment watching her sleep. Then I went back to the kitchen. I turned on the overhead light this time. I opened the refrigerator and looked at what was in it without flinching. I looked at the $11 in my account. I looked at the $412 in our joint account, which I had managed to access on my phone while Gordon slept, using the banking app one had never deleted, even though he had gently suggested, once, that I didn't really need to check the account since he managed everything. I stood there in the bright kitchen light, and I felt something settle inside me. Something quiet and cold and absolutely certain. I was done. I didn't know how yet. I didn't have a plan. I didn't have savings or a support system fully mapped out or legal advice at my fingertips. I had $11, a daughter with unraveling braids, and the bone-deep knowledge that I could not spend one more night sitting on that floor wondering how I got here. The wondering was over. The doing was about to begin. But first, I had to understand exactly what I was dealing with. Because Gordon Foley was not a man who would let go easily. He was not a man who would see his control slipping and simply step aside. He was not a man who would hear the word leave and respond with anything other than very carefully applied pressure to make sure I stayed. I knew this the way you know things about people you have lived with and watched and loved despite yourself. I knew it in the way he handled conflict. Never yelling, never threatening directly, but tilting every conversation so that I left it doubting myself. I knew it in the way he talked about my family. Subtle observations that sounded like concern but functioned as wedges. Your mother means well, but she has a way of making you feel like you can't handle things. Your friend Sandra seems to enjoy your struggles a little too much, don't you think? These things were said once, quietly, with a look of genuine care. But they were said strategically. I had drifted away from Sandra. I had stopped calling my mother as often. My social world had grown small and Gordon-shaped, and I had told myself it was just the natural quieting of adult life, the busyness of marriage and motherhood. But isolation is a tool, and I had been too tired and too trusting to recognize it being used on me. Now, on that Tuesday night, standing in the bright kitchen light with the refrigerator still open and the cold air pooling around my feet, I thought of Sandra for the first time in months. I thought of what she might say if I called her. I thought she might say, "Ally, I've been waiting." I thought she might be right. I didn't make any calls that night. I didn't do anything dramatic. I closed the refrigerator, turned off the light, and went to bed. I lay next to Gordon, who was sleeping soundly, deeply, completely unbothered by the empty refrigerator or the daughter who had gone to bed on scrambled eggs, and I stared at the ceiling. And I made a list in my head. Not a list of grievances. Not a list of everything he had done wrong or everything I had lost. That list would have kept me awake until morning and left me exhausted and raw and no closer to a door. I made a list of what I needed to do. Step 1, understand the money. All of it. Every account, every balance, every debt. I needed to see the full picture, even if what I saw was terrible. Step 2, call Sandra. Step 3, figure out where I could go if I needed to go somewhere. Step 4, talk to someone who knew about these situations. A professional, a counselor, someone who had helped women untangle exactly this kind of knot. Step 5, protect Leah. In every way, at every step, no matter what. That was it. That was the list. I fell asleep before midnight, which surprised me. But I think my body understood, even before my mind had fully caught up, that the long, terrible season of waiting and wondering was over. The morning was coming, and I was going to be ready for it. I sat in the dark that night because the dark felt honest. But when my daughter's voice broke through it, I remembered something I had forgotten somewhere in those 3 years of slow erosion. I was not someone who stayed in the dark. I was someone who turned the light on. And the light, no matter how small, no matter how late, always changes what you can see. If this story is touching something inside you, if you've ever sat in a dark room wondering how you got there while the world expected you to be fine, then you are not alone. Alyssa's story is just beginning, and what happens next will remind you of something important. The moment a woman decides she is done being diminished is the most powerful moment in any story. Hit that subscribe button so you don't miss part 2, because what Alyssa discovers next about Gordon, about her money, and about herself is going to leave you speechless. And if you know someone who needs to hear this story, share it. You never know whose kitchen floor someone is sitting on tonight. Part 2 is coming. Stay with us.